Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today, Leadership on the Boundary, a panel discussion with three innovative community college presidents on reimagining post-secondary success. It's my pleasure to introduce Drs. Michael Baston, Marielena DeSanctis, and Russell D. Lowery-Hart to our network conversation today. All three of our guests are accomplished leaders in their field, and they have all been Aspen Presidential Fellows for Community College Excellence. I'm going to do a quick round of brief introductions, and then I'm going to pull down these slides and get everyone's faces up here, and we're going to get going. So to start, Dr. Baston has served as president of Rockland Community College in New York since 2017. His work and influence are well documented. He is a leading voice in the field on issues about social justice and how to develop comprehensive supports that foster college completion. Dr. Baston serves on a number of important committees and commissions, including as the incoming co-chair of JFF's Policy Leadership Trust. Welcome, Dr. Baston. Dr. DeSanctis took the helm as president of the Community College of Denver in January of this year. She's currently in the process of moving. After serving as the provost and senior vice president for academic affairs and student services at Broward College, Dr. DeSanctis has a remarkable 2 decades-long track record as a leader in both K-12 and higher ed settings, and brings extensive lived experience as an engineer in the manufacturing and construction sector to her leadership as a community college president. Welcome, Dr. DeSanctis. Finally, Dr. Lowery-Hart has been president of Amarillo College since 2014. Prior to serving in this capacity, he served as the college's vice president of academic affairs and in faculty positions at West Texas A&M University. He is the recipient of the National Academic Leader of the Year Award by the National Council of Instructional Administrators and previously chaired the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board's Undergraduate Advisory Committee. He's also the only one of the 3 panelists who had the pleasure of traveling with me on a tour of the Swiss vet system during an uncharacteristically hot summer. Welcome, Dr. Lowery-Hart. So I am going to drop this playlist. I'll let you unmute yourself. So I'm just going to jump right in here. So one approach to this conversation would be for me to just say, tell us all the important things. And I think that a version of that may happen anyway. I'm just warning all of our participants here that there's going to be no shortage of conversation, I think. And I honestly, I really do welcome open conversation amongst the 3 of you. I think a rich exchange of ideas and perspectives is what will make this session really fly. But I do want to open it up with a really easy question. And then we'll use that to set the table. So each of you is a president of a community college rooted in a different region of the country, all of which have unique needs and economies. And I imagine that from your own vantage point, you don't see yourself as being on the boundary, that you would just say that you are just doing the right work that needs to be done. But I'd like to actually push you a little bit to maybe set aside some of your humility and pull back the curtain a little bit and share with us your vision for how you want your college to be your community's college. And maybe to frame that in a slightly different way, if you want to take this approach, is how, or what is your vision for how everyone in your community, youth, young adults, and adults, can have access to the education and training that they need to thrive? I told you it was going to be an easy question. I will be scoring your answers. So, Dr. Baston, I see that you have your mic open if you want to lean in here, and then we'll pass
Our answer is whatever Michael says.
Oh, you're too kind. You asked the question about sort of how we want the institutions to thrive, but I think the answer really is, how do people live the lives that they deserve? And it is important for us to cast a vision for the communities in which we live and what they can mean for the vitality of the regions in which we are located. The only way for our communities to be strong is that if we have quality education and that people can see themselves contributing as citizens. And so that requires that there is an interconnection between K-12 and the 4-year space and the 2-year space. space. It revolves around this idea of connecting with business and industry and our community-based organizations. It really says that we have to have big goals and big dreams for the communities in which we are located, and the community college happens to be that opportunity to be that beacon light, that powerful connector that brings these various different groups together to give us all the best chance to live the lives we all deserve.
Here we go.
Right.
Michael, thank you. Russell, Marielena, you want to build on that, push back, bring in another perspective?
I'll build on that, if I would, Kyle. You know, being very new to the Denver community, it really stands out to me that there are so many different entities in the community working on the very same thing, and that is, how do we lift the residents of Denver, of Colorado, through post-secondary education, connect them to sustainable wage employment. So there's a number of, Prosperity Colorado and the Chamber and the Department of Economic Opportunity, and then you have K-12 and the technical colleges and the community colleges. And how do we bring all of that together, but through the community college, which is that beacon, which is that convener? And, I've long thought, even back when I was in K-12, how interesting it is that we have employer advisory boards for the K-12 school districts, for the community colleges, for the universities, 444. And if we really are all focused on that same goal, which we say that we are, why isn't there one advisory board that we are all engaged in, and we're not worried about competition in that space, but rather how do we join arms to uplift the community together? An employer could not possibly begin to supply all of us with the depth and breadth of knowledge needed to really engage and understand how to build curriculum and connect students to these job opportunities if they're sending people to 20, 25 different institutions, as opposed to centralizing all of that. And I would propose the community college is the space, the neutral space where everyone could come together and engage in that substantive work.
So I think that's really, really important, because we're wearing our partners out. Like, the ISDs have advisory boards. We have 1,000 advisory boards. The universities have advisory boards. There are community boards. And these employers are spending all their time going to every board, delivering the same message, and there are no ears that want to act on it, to hear it and then act on it. And I think what you're proposing is really important. And I think we've got to be better in the community college sector in making our case for it. And making our case, as you just lined out, Marielena, as the convener, as the glue. In Amarillo, we talk about how Amarillo is only as strong as its college, and that we have to be the centerpiece of reimagining our economy, but we have to make the case for it, not that we're the important part of it, but that we're central to it. Edward Glazer, you're going to get a little sermon, Michael. Forgive me. Edward Glazer is an economist. He wrote a book, Triumph of the City. And what he says is you can predict which cities are going to succeed or fail over the next decade based on one simple number, education attainment. And we can talk about all the resources that universities are drowning in, but don't have any will to reimagine themselves in the higher education sector with. But they're not going to be the solution to getting the credentials and the education attainment that's going to change our local economies. We are. But we often shy away from standing up and claiming our importance. And I think we got to claim it, and we got to make the case for it. And then we've got to demonstrate our ability to bring all the partners together, especially as you just articulated, absent of competition. We've got to build this ecosystem where everyone sees their role as building on each other, not in competition with each other. Not going to be easy to do, but it's really, for my community, it's the only hope we have is if we're aligning our resources, because we don't have enough of them to duplicate the services that are being duplicated right now. Insane.
So Russell, I'd love to pick up on that point and welcome, everyone else into the conversation. So like the spirit of that sounds so right. Like how do we, this isn't about taking over these systems. It's not about like being the most important actor. And I think that there's probably lots of people in the room right now who would agree with that. But how do you do that? Or like, how have you done that? Like, how have you seen success in setting aside some of the things that you might want to hold on to so that you could welcome in other partners? And similarly, how have you figured out what you needed to hold on to or help your partners understand that you can't let go of? Like, could you all share a little bit give us a sense of what that has looked like as you've tried to recreate a vision for partnership with the community college at the center?
It's a great question from a person who has the best headshot I've ever seen in any setting. Kyle, I love your headshot. It communicates 1,000 words. I'm going to recreate it and steal it. But so the issue is everyone's coming to these conversations feeling like they got to protect something. And we have to create an environment where everyone thinks they're coming to the conversation to offer something. At Amarillo, that really started for us by taking the Economic Development Corporation head and the superintendent of our largest school system and the president of the college. We went to Baston and JFF, facilitated a day-long conversation that had an outside facilitator that legitimized the conversation and gave some sense of fairness to it, where no one was feeling like someone had the leg up. As a result of that one-day conversation, we have now built out a map for 18 technical degrees that start in our local ISD, that get a level 1 certificate, that come to us to finish out with a levels 2 and an associate's degree, or a series of other micro-credentials that have allowed our Economic Development Corporation to go sell access to skills that other communities might not have. And we have communities already relocating because of this alignment. We've had more difficulty getting the university to feel comfortable articulating their alignment. But I think that we're going to get there because they're at least at the table, right? And when they see where these students can migrate into their enrollments, where they're not losing, they're gaining. And I think that's the key. No one loses in these alignments. The fear is we're going to lose. But if you can sit down in partnership, everyone actually gains more. Already just in advertising these 18 alignments, the ISD has grown their enrollment in their career and tech center. And it's because it's not just saying come here and take 2 classes in auto mechanics. It's come here, get started, get a level 1 credential, and within a year have an associate's degree in a technical field that pays a family sustaining wage. You got to find some wins. You got to find the right partners, and you got to come to the table, I think, with an outside facilitator that can help you start mapping those things out.
Marielena, let me, all right,
Sorry.
You're live. No, go for it.
So I think you're exactly right, Russell. And, I haven't been in Denver quite long enough to see this play out there, but certainly in Broward County, we saw it play out in the hotel and restaurant management pathway. So there's an amazing woman, Ramola Matwani, who had a vision that she was going to build this very strong pathway from K-12 through the technical college, through the community college, over to the university. And just really hard work over a span of, it's probably been 10 years, put this entire pipeline through that, to your point, did nothing but strengthen each partner along the way, so that students can start with, restaurant management, hotel management within the high school. It included mentorship of the high school teachers with industry partners. But the key here was, and this is why I brought up a minute ago about these advisory boards that aren't splintered. It was the same advisory board, the same core group of people that were meeting with K-12, the technical college, the community college, and the university to build this entire program and pipeline and all of the supports needed, from faculty training, teacher training, student supports. So it's an isolated case, but it should certainly be replicated.
Well, I would add this. Crisis has a way of clarifying. And we have been in the midst of a tremendous amount of crises that now require us to have greater clarity as to how we are going to work together. Just think for a moment in the K-12 space about those students who have been interrupted in their educational pursuit in their last year, and how many of them have had the challenge of stopping in and stopping out, and mom and dad may have lost their jobs. So now I'm going to take a part of the gig economy where I'm doing Instacart or DoorDash or those kinds of things to help now fill the gap that is left. To what extent are we in the educational ecosystem working to partner along those crisis points, those pain points, those ways that we can help to kind of rescue all of the students who have been so terribly impacted by this horrible virus? What we have found is that the work that we're now doing to do some intentional work in the high schools to appropriately transition students over the summer into the college with these support mechanisms will ultimately better prepare those students whose smooth career has been interrupted because of what has happened in the pandemic. How are we making sure that we're providing opportunities for their parents to get the shorter term credential that will then get them back into work? And what are the kinds of ways that we can organize the shorter term credentials so that they can get credit for exactly what they have learned to do for themselves? And so it's, what are the opportunities in the business community where now gaps exist as a result of the virus? Not just the shutting down of certain industries, but the starting up of other industries. And how are we thinking deeply about the clarifying points of the current crisis and the points of connection where collaboration can be real and meaningful? And this is what I have found at Rockland. Our work, particularly with our K-12 partners and our partners in the four-year space, has really helped us to think in a more very strategic way. How do we make these points of connection work?
And maybe we can use this as an extension point, and Michael, maybe you could start, and then let's branch back out again. If I'm hearing you correctly, like the crisis we've been living under, it seems to have catalyzed in some way people's, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like interest or commitment or willingness to have a different type of conversation. Do you feel like you have been able to, have you had to position yourself as the catalyzer of bringing people together to clarify these clarifying points? That's a weird way of saying it, but you know what I mean. Or have you been able to shift some of that responsibility? What has that been like for you in the Rockland community? And I would love to hear a little bit about maybe Broward, if you want to go back to that point, and then Amarillo.
Well, you have to, there's someone, in any dance, someone takes the lead. But over the course of the dance, the actual lead may shift depending on how things go. And so we began to reach out to many community-based organizations to say, how do we marshal the social service networks that won't just help our students and their families, but the larger community. How do we become that convener with our local Department of Human Rights? So we now partner with our Rockland County Division of Human Rights on all of these sort of equity-oriented actions as a result of the multiple crises, so structural racism being one of those crises. And so there are things that we will host, there are things that they will host. You begin to get into a rhythm of shared, co-created outcomes, but someone has to step up and make the first entree, the first invitation. And what I have found is when we have reached out to the hospitals and said to them, listen, we want to build out for you a talent development pipeline where we can help to be part of the catalyst of fulfilling the positions that are available. And we will bring in other partners, from the four-year space, but start with us. Like those conversations then have really fanned out, where we're a part of some of the things that they were doing that we weren't a part of before. And so we're starting to learn the power of collaboration and its ability to put you in the co-creation space so that you're not trying to get buy-in. Because buy-in says basically, you got to accept what I'm putting down. Whereas if we can get together and start to co-create, we can envision a future, we can establish accountability and a cadence of accountability, and we can actually get things done.
Yeah, so Kyle, when I think about the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis, I don't think any of us as college presidents or college leaders could have imagined being able to transition the way that we did. I mean, we really have to hand it to our faculty, to our staff that jumped right in and overnight reimagined the way that they were teaching students, reimagined the way that they were learning, the way that we were engaging students, the way that we were serving students. And it gives me incredible hope for the future. And what else can come from this crisis. And for a long time now, the signals have been out there that, a lot of America isn't really sure what the return on investment is of a college degree. And I can tell you that as you're coming out of this pandemic, I can't go to communities where people have been displaced from work, where they don't know how they're going to keep food on the table and say, hey, you know what? I've got this phenomenal 2-year degree that I know that you need to engage in part-time because you also need to work and take care of your family. So 5 years from now, your life's going to be better. Nobody's going to buy what I'm selling. I don't even buy it, right? So how do we really engage in short-term credentials that are meaningful to our marketplace so that people aren't coming to us and spending time and money, time being the even more precious resource, we have a finite amount of that, and get them to, from a minimum wage job to a $20 an hour job. And then, hey, give me another semester or two and we can get you to a $30 an hour job. Give me another semester or two, we can get you to $55,000 a year, right? And how do I help not only understand what that means for my community, but how do I help the college community understand that we need to shift our thinking from 2-year degrees, 2-year to university transfer, and that these short-term credentials are the way to go. And then I think the other piece of that, building on what Michael was saying with the conversations with the hospital, are too often I find that the people having the conversations with the hospital are the people in our health sciences. But guess what? That hospital has an IT department, right, needs data analytics, has an HR department. There are a number of different employment opportunities within the hospital, but the business department isn't speaking to the hospital. The IT department isn't speaking to the hospital, just the nursing, radiography, ultrasound. They're the ones speaking to the hospital.
I think to build on this crisis that we're in and how do we leverage it, we're also getting more money poured into community colleges than we've ever had to support students. And how can we respond to the crisis with this student aid money in a way that addresses what you just talked about. So right now, my students are working 2 part-time jobs while they go to school, and the micro-credential is really important. But what if on top of their financial aid, we used portions of this student aid to pay students a salary while they're going through a micro-credentialing program and partner with the companies that are going to hire them on the front end to partner with us to pay half. Like, the crisis is going to clarify what our opportunities are, but the solutions aren't going to look like they looked 20 months ago. And we have some money to respond to these things in ways that we've never had before. But if we look at how do we just maintain the system that was rather than leveraging the crisis to rebuild what's possible and integrating apprenticeships and earn and learn models and work-based learning experiences where we're putting students and employer like in businesses and leveraging these monies to pay them while they're learning could rebuild higher education and give those families that you referenced that don't have 5 years, they might not even have 5 months, but it could ease some of that financial burden so they could focus on their education and earn a family sustaining wage at the end of it.
You know, I hear you talk about that, and I love the arc of where this is going, and I'm thinking like this idea of you know, being paid for work, which is not a radical proposition, but you know, all too often is something that it doesn't happen, and it's part of the holy grail of this work is how do we get not just students who are enrolled in post-secondary education and training, but even in high school, if they're engaged in work, how do we pay them for the work that they do, especially as we think about students who are helping to support their families.
Not just pay them, but how do we give them academic credit for the work they're doing at the same time? Sorry.
No apologies, because this is a little bit where I was going. So this vision around paid work, a vision around work-based learning, the credits they need. How far are we, do you think, from your vantage point? And obviously, you're sitting in the community college, you have many stakeholders, you have lots of vested interests, you're serving multiple populations. But as you think about this continuum of secondary and post-secondary working in concert to realize these goals, what do you feel like are the moves that you can make or that we as a field need to make to really realize a vision so that a student in secondary sees, I'm taking these courses now, I'm being paid for my work-based learning opportunities now, and then when I get to Rockland or Amarillo, this is what happens next. Like, how far are we from being able to realize that as you see it through the lens of your work right now?
Well, every place is different. I can say this to you that where there is a tight connection between the K-12 space and the two-year space, where they are actually building academic bridges together, where the career exploration happens in the secondary institutions in alignment with what is happening in the two-year space, where there are conversations in the K-12 space about financial planning that happen in conversation with the community college, where there's co-branding of certain specific transfer in opportunities, college and high school opportunities. When those things are in place, the students and the communities win, because we actually offer an educational proposition at a price that they can afford that can change the trajectory of their lives and the many generations connected to them. So it is very important that, you know, I'm going to take some ownership on our behalf in the two-year space. In some colleges around our country, there is a workforce development side of the house, a CTE side of the house, and then there is the quote-unquote academic side of the house. Or in some states, there are career technical schools versus the community college. And so we've got to get to the place where we are actually tearing down some of the artificial barriers between these sort of opportunities within the two-year space, so that it makes it clearer, easier, more coherent an experience for our brothers and sisters who happen to be in the primary space, in the secondary space. Because at the end of the day, the lack of alignment, which allows the confusion, has students all over the place and sometimes just dropping out of the whole proposition. And the more we begin to braid the experience and to tell a coherent story, that while you're in high school, you can actually learn the kind of career paths that there are and the places you can go and the things you can do while you're in high school to prepare and get you further ahead on that path and to save some of the resources so that you can go as far as your dreams can take you. All of that has to happen. And we've got to be very intentional, even in the 2-year space. Now, I'm not talking about nobody else. I'm talking about us. We have to make sure that our stuff is together so that, because oftentimes what I have found is this kind of thing. So sometimes we might say, well, they didn't prepare them well. And they might say, well, they're not really giving them the right information to come in and be successful. We need to stop doing this and start doing this. How do we come together? How do we help people? How do we do it in a way that transforms lives and the communities in which we live and work?
Yeah,
Yes,
Kyle.
yes, and yes.
Yeah, Kyle, I don't think we're very far away at all.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, there's 2 conversations going on right now in this country that when they converge, not if, because they are going to converge, it is going to be transformative. So number one, you look to the work that Strata Education's doing through their national labor market powerhouse, MZ, in talking about skillifying the curriculum and using the same skills-based language that employers use through the K-12 and higher ed continuum, and getting rid of this 19th century transcript that doesn't tell employers anything. They have no idea what a student has actually learned in an Associate of Science in Business Administration from the Community College of Denver as compared to Rockland Community College or Amarillo Community College. If I'm looking for a job and I'm looking for a web developer, the first thing I'm going to do is go to the skills to see, well, what exactly type of, what are they looking for? HTML? Are they looking for JavaScript? Are they looking for just plain Java, right? Well, an employer doesn't have the opportunity to do that backwards. All they see is the title of the degree until, of course, you send them transcripts, which, of course, gets you to the conversation about when was the last time you got a new job and you had to run around to 3, 4, 5 different institutions to gather up your transcripts. It's crazy. So not only do we need to be using the same language, the same skills-based language, so that we're connecting with employment in education, but the second conversation that's going on is how do you leverage blockchain technology to create these learner education records that are immutable, verifiable, belong to the learner, so that I can take employer-based training, I can take traditional college courses, I can engage in stuff through Coursera, edX, name your favorite platform, and all of that belongs to me. I can send pieces and or all of it to employers. Employers will be able to have a much better clarity about the skills of their own employees that may have transitioned over time because they too are learning while they earn. I think when these 2 things converge, there's going to be real transformation in education and employment ecosystem.
And I don't think we're that far off from that. But but what we tend to do in higher education is it's this syndrome I call checkbox leadership, where, we have a program that is skills based and is playing at the technology of empowering students to own their information, and then we say we do it. And the issue is we're already capable of doing it, because almost every community college has at least the first part of your conversation, maybe dabbling in the second part. We have examples where we have skill-based programs that are aligned to workforce needs that have a K-12 partnership. And because we have it, we travel all over our communities and our states telling people how great it is, but we're satisfied with just having 2 of them. And the transformation's going to come when we're not satisfied until we have scaled it to all of them. And that's where our focus has to be: scale. How do we scale what we're already doing in subsets of our institutions where it's across 80% of our programs, not just 2 or 3 of them?
And we're not scaring the humanities people and the liberal arts people, because that's the thing. It's like, guess what? Critical thinking, all of the things that you add to the conversation are a part of this whole design. And so it cannot just be, well, we went from CNA to LPN and LPN to an RN, and that's the continuum. Ta-da! We've got to be able to do more than that, as Russell is talking about. And it is possible, but we also have to shake off sometimes this raging concern that we won't be the liberal arts transfer institution that we really never were. Because when you think about it, you have a lot of people in this country with lots of college credits and no degree. And so we oftentimes talk about, well, you have all these students and they go to community college and they don't finish. Well, if we look at all the students that started in every college and don't finish in this country, we would really scratch our head. And we have to ask, why is that? And some of the answer has to be because of us.
And Russell, Michael, rather, I wanted to re-highlight something that you had said about the silos between academics and CTE, because, I keep pushing back on, well, isn't every program a workforce program?
Yeah.
If I walk around my college and I ask 8,000 students, why are you here at college? They're all going to give me some version of to get a better job. So they are all workforce programs. And I think that we as leaders need to continue to really challenge ourselves to make sure that the gen ed faculty are in these conversations about workforce and the labor market and on advisory boards, and really making sure that we really integrate and become one college and not 2 colleges with 2 purposes when there's really only one.
Yes, let's all break down those silos. Thank you for naming that. It's such an archaic artifact of a very different time and mindset. And I wonder, and maybe this is, I know we're gonna run out of time, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of a chance to hear about this, because I think that this divide, both in the 2-year space, but in some of the 4-year spaces, between guided pathways and career pathways, or CTE and the humanities, it raises a lot of questions around equity when we look at students who enroll in those particular programs, who finishes, which programs are incentivized. And I'm wondering, what have you been doing? And again, in this broader lens of partnerships, not just working with faculty or departments within your institutions, but thinking about partnering outside of your institution to call the hard questions and meet head on the questions around equity, in terms of not just who has the opportunities to engage in work-based learning, but what are the expectations that are set for young people to have these experiences, because you can establish a value chain that leads into something that is related to meaning and dignity in their working lives. What have you, are you finding resistance there? Are you moving forward in that arena? Like, as we think about building a really equitable approach to making sure that students have access to enroll in these programs and come out the other side with a credential with value in the labor market.
I'm happy to jump in here first. And I can tell you that from my perspective, we have what we call steps beyond statements. And we are looking at the discrete aspects of the student experience to determine, are there gaps in equity at these critical junctures of the student experience? And that would be the connection point. Who are we recruiting into what programs, and how are we making sure that those are connected to high wage opportunities, and who gets to be in those high wage opportunities? And how are we making sure that that is reflective of the actual composition in the community? How are we ensuring that we are partnering with those folks on the back end of this experience, where our students are ultimately going to work or to transition to, how are we making sure that there's equitable transfer into opportunities on the back end so that they can get on a ladder that actually works for them? And it's a ladder to somewhere instead of a ladder to nowhere. And I think that it is extraordinarily important that all of us in our various institutions really look at that connection phase, that first year experience. To what extent are we making sure that those who are marginalized historically, minoritized historically, not having the opportunities to pass those gateway courses? What are the interventions that are being developed very strategically to ensure that people get through gateway courses and get through the first year and actually move through the continuum of opportunities along those critical junctures? If we're going to be effective, and we're doing this at my institution, we're looking at these discrete aspects of that student's experience. We're looking at the demographic data. We're looking at the partnerships and how they are actually impacted by what we are producing on the outcome end. And we've got to be very intentional as institutions to say it's not enough to say we're anti-racist, we're against bigotry, we love and promote equality and inclusiveness and blah, blah, blah. It's great to say all that stuff. But if you are not committing resources, if you are not being intentional about the programmatic opportunities, the relationships that you build with those institutions that are going to receive your students, or those workplace opportunities that are going to give them internships, if you're not very intentional about leveling the playing field, you basically observe the problem and you're not a part of the solution.
Thank you.
Well, Michael, yes, there are two ends of this continuum that keep me up at night, and I think all of our colleges are doing amazing work in closing equity gaps for enrollment and persistence and retention and completion. But that front end piece, how do we know that when a student comes to us and says, "I want to study X"? Are they telling us that because that happens to be something they know? Is their social circle impacting their decision? I mean, I'm very well traveled, have multiple degrees, come from a family where both parents graduated from college. And at least once a month, I stumble across somebody and I say, "Oh my gosh, I never even knew that career existed." Right? So what does that mean for students that don't have the social circle that I have, that don't have the upbringing that I have? And are we being very intentional at the front end of pushing on the student and making sure that they're not just choosing that because it's the only thing they know? And then the other piece that keeps me up at night is, Michael touched on, is this back end piece. And I think it was highlighted for me when I had my own kids graduating from college. And I was their number one PR firm. There wasn't an event, there wasn't a person that I did not meet where I was, and they both graduated with great degrees from great universities. They didn't really need my help, quote unquote. But, I'm trying to make that connection for them because these employers are receiving thousands and thousands and thousands of resumes. And at the end of the day, how do they decide who are the 20, 30, 40 people that they interview out of the 400 or 500 resumes that they've received? Sometimes, quite frankly, it's because somebody says, "Hey, I happen to know this kid's parent," right? But so many of the students at the Community College of Denver don't have that social network. So we could be doing all of this hard work to bring them into the right degree for them, get them through those gateway courses, get them to persist, retain them, give them aid, make sure they're totally supported, graduate them, and then they end up out there on their own competing against the students like my kids.
Right.
I'm helping them, write cover letters, and I'm reminding them to send the thank you note after the interview, and I'm helping them write the thank you note after the interview. And it's not fair. I mean, it is. That's what's happening. So how do I, as a community college leader, knowing that, collapse that gap in social network for my students? And I can tell you, I don't have the answer yet.
Well, that's why we bring these networks together, and we need to keep forging new partnerships to, I think that only together can we actually start to really chip away at this. Like these rafts of innovative ideas, we need to seed them and activate them through socialization. So thank you for these things. We're right about at time. Russell, I want to make sure that you have a chance to sort of weigh in on this last piece around equity before people are gonna like start knocking on my virtual door saying, Kyle, you have to let people go back to the final plenary session. But so Russell, like, what are some of your final thoughts on this? Really
quickly, I think given what we just heard, it is also an equity issue of the luxury to pick a field that you're passionate about and want to do. And we have so many students that come in, speak to an advisor, and are like, where are the jobs that our community needs and how long will it take me? And there's no question about whether they want to do it or not. They don't have a choice financially, but to tackle what the needs are, not what their personal desires might be. And that's an equity issue that we don't spend a lot of time talking about. And I think it's financially driven, as we just heard. It's culturally and socially driven, and we need to ask deeper questions of ourselves when we're placing students in pathways.
So true.
Friends, we are a little bit over. Marielena, Michael, Russell, thank you so much for joining this conversation today, for provoking our friends in this network. Would love to do some follow-up on some of the points that were raised today. And sort of like I said a moment ago, I think that there's lots of innovation that we can learn from about this, but also would love to be able to find ways to seed these ideas and disseminate them, but also bring some of that learning back into your own communities and your own work. Thank you for your work and your leadership in this space and for joining us today. Really, thank you all.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well.